Hello and welcome to today's video. I decided to rank every single project in the entire MCU. That includes every movie and all the Disney Plus shows, but doesn't include Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Sony Spider-Man movies, or the Fox X-Men films. This is strictly the main canon. There will be spoilers in some of these segments, so you have been warned. Also, two things. One, the rankings on this list is entirely my opinion. Two, there are some nuclear takes ahead, so be prepared to get burned. Now, with that in mind, I see no reason not to get started. H tier. Secret Invasion. Let me preface this. I have seen the Star Wars Holiday Special. I have seen Food Fight. I have seen some of Birdemic Shock and Terror. I have seen the live-action remake of Mulan. Keep all that in mind because Secret Invasion might actually be the single worst, most insulting, poorly made piece of media I have ever had the immense displeasure of forcing myself to endure. I generally don't know how to express just how awful this show is in words, but you came here for words, so I'll try my best. Secret Invasion feels like it's vehemently, fundamentally opposed to the very concept of being logical or entertaining. There is nothing in these 6 episodes that conjured up an air of interest, joy, or anything else besides a sense of dulled confusion. There is, aside from a couple of line deliveries, nothing to enjoy about any of this. There's no good humor, there's no good action. The only plot developments are delivered badly. It feels like it exists for the sole reason to kill off existing characters. If mistakes makes you stronger, the creators of Secret Invasion have mastered Ultra Instinct. It is flat out embarrassing that Marvel Studios spent $200 million on this. Where did it go? It didn't go to the effects, it didn't go to the actors, it didn't go to the writing. Sweet glory, it didn't go to the writing. This is the only MCU project that I heavily recommend you skip. If for some bizarre reason you actually want to watch it, don't. Seriously, don't. It really is just that bad. It was directed by a wooden board and written by a 14-year-old as their very first writing project of any kind ever. Oh, and don't even get me started on the opening credits. F tier. In F tier, we have nothing, actually. Yeah, the difference between Secret Crapvasion and the next step up is pretty massive, and it means there's nothing that fits this particular score of bad. Anyway, moving on. D tiers. Iron Man 2. I don't have nearly as much to say about Iron Man 2 for a good reason. There's just not much to say about it. It was the worst MCU entry for a long time. I saw it the day I wrote this list, and I still have basically nothing to say about it whatsoever. It's just boring, derivative filler that serves no real purpose. Black Widow was introduced far better in Avengers, so you don't even need to see it for her. Plus, it has Elon Musk in it, and that automatically makes any movie worse. I bet you wish I had more to say, but I honestly do not. Moving on. Thor: The Dark World. Thor: The Dark World is a film so shockingly forgettable that every time you watch it is like for the first time. A decent enough story, but with meh dialogue, meh direction, meh action, and a villain so unbelievably boring an actual cardboard cutout could have done the same job. They had Christopher Eccleston on board, and actively chose to do nothing with him. Do you remember that this movie actually had some of the biggest stakes in the MCU, with the Dark Elves threatening to destroy the universe? I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't remember. I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't remember anything about this movie. I hardly do, despite how many times I've forced myself to watch it for purposes of this list. It's the worst Thor movie by a long shot. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Let me tell you something. I tend to watch movies while I'm doing something else, such as drawing or eating. One day I was drawing while watching this movie, and multiple times I thought to myself, oh, I should put something on, only to remember, oh yes, I am watching something. Unfortunately, it was Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. That should tell you everything you need to know about this movie, but let's keep going. Quantumania feels like a 2-hour commercial for Phase 5 first, an actual movie second. It exists for the sole purpose of setting up Kane, doesn't even do that well. Kane does not even remotely feel like a threat here. He boasts that he's unstoppable and gets defeated out of basically nowhere by a bunch of ants. The main threat to the Avengers loses to Ant-Man in a 1v1. Kane wishes he was Thanos. Kane will never be Thanos. And this movie will never be anything more than boring. No, I'm not talking about MODOK. You can't make me. Black Widow. I was able to see this movie in theaters. Every single time I've seen a movie in theaters, I've enjoyed it, with the sole exception of The Last Airbender. And you know what? During the viewing of Black Widow, I actually genuinely started dozing off. It was the middle of the day. I wasn't tired from anything beforehand. It was just that boring. This might be a personal issue, for I've never particularly enjoyed spy thrillers, but this wasn't even a good spy thriller, all things considered. I hardly remember anything about it, even during the parts where I didn't fall asleep, except for how monumentally stupid the villain was. He sniffs people and controls them or something? Whatever. It's a whatever movie. If movies were spices, Black Widow wouldn't even be salt. It would be flour. Eternals. I like the idea of Eternals way more than the movie itself, which somehow managed to take a story about 10 immortal super beings trying to stop the Earth's destruction feel tepid and slow. I will give it this though, it tried. Even if it didn't manage to be an epic cosmic opera, it get points for attempting something super cool. That's worth something, right? Even if it's just dry and boring in most spots, with dull direction, lifeless colorations, and a boring screenplay, it at least tried to show off something more in the cosmic side of the MCU. Whatever. It's a boring movie that I have very little to say about. Let's move on, because I don't want to talk about the D tier movies anymore. C tiers. Here we have our C tiers. The average projects, or the ones that are so much of a mixed bag that I have to put them here. The passing, but barely grades. These aren't bad entries exactly, but they aren't really good ones either. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is the ultimate representation of Phase 4 as a whole. It's a confusingly written, bizarrely planned mess that tries to do too many things at once and succeeds in only a few of them. It tries to shuffle about 10 different themes and plot lines, thereby giving very little time to any of them. It tries to be a sequel to both Doctor Strange and WandaVision without exactly delivering on either. It messes around with the multiverse without doing anything interesting with it, and ends up delivering a very muffled package overall. But I can't say that it's exactly horrible. Even though it has one of the muddiest scripts I've ever seen in a big budget feature film, not quite the worst, looking at you, Crimes of Grindelwald, there are parts of this movie that have that shine the original Doctor Strange did, with some excellent fight scenes, some wonderfully cheesy sequences, and some very inventive, actually kind of artistic direction. That's enough to save it from being in D tier, but not enough to save it from being any higher from the very bottom of C. What If? What If has a few episodes that are some of the best entries the entire MCU has to offer. They're tense, thoughtful, well-written, and viscerally intense. You know full well which episodes they are, because the rest of the episodes range from actively bad to fairly entertaining. It's a little hard to talk about the entirety of What If like this, due to them all being so different, and thus not actually being reviewable. I'd say the first season is a little better than the second season, due to actually having an overarching plot. In fact, I kind of forgot season 2 came out. I watched it all, it just barely stuck in my mind. It's pretty much the definition of a mixed bag, so into the low C tier it goes. Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel is one of the movies in the MCU. It has a story, and a main protagonist, and a villain, and some side characters, some of which are better than others. It's certainly not awful like a lot of people make it out to be, but it's not really anything special either. It's basically the median of all Marvel movies with a perfectly serviceable plot, some working characters, and not a whole lot else. Honestly, don't know what else to say about it, so let's just move on. Winter Soldier. Okay, don't get mad. I know for a fact that this is an extremely controversial opinion, but I will stand by it. That being said, I genuinely don't know what everyone else seems to see in the Winter Soldier. Like, yes, it briefly deals with Steve's conflicting moralities and obedience, but it continuously buries anything interesting under mounds of generic spy action that does nothing to further anything. Yes, it's about the roles of heroes in society and all that, until it forgets about that plotline for about 20 minutes to bring us random fight scenes. Probably about half of this movie is just flashing metal and fists, and that's what really ruins it for me. I really wish I knew what other people see in it, because I just don't get it. I'm sure you all like it, but I really just don't get it. Sorry if I put your favorite movie in C tier, but this is my list. Captain America. Captain America is a pretty okay movie. That's really about it. It's not as perfectly average as Captain Marvel, but it doesn't land that much higher. It's a fairly generic solo movie for someone who does end up being one of the best characters in the MCU, but that's mostly due to later development in Infinity War and especially Civil War. I did rewatch it for the purpose of this list, but I didn't get very much from it on the rewatch, and I don't think another watch would do anything for me. If Captain America was food, it would be war rations. Loki Season 1. If there's one thing I don't like about Loki, it's that Loki feels more like Arthur Dent, which is a massive turn away in what's supposed to be his own show. Sylvie feels much more like the main character, and Loki Dent just stumbles around and is confused by things. Other than that, the show's pretty good, with a lot of interesting ideas, cool scenes, and massive implications for the future. The existence of the TVA is still one of the cooler things in the MCU, and does a much better job with the whole multiverse shtick than anything else in the MCU. Had Loki been treated better, it would have landed higher, but oh well, right here it is. Do note, this only applies to Season 1. Season 2 is in a much different spot. Thor! Yeah, Thor! I love Thor! He's one of my favorite characters in anything. His first entry in the MCU is decent, I guess. I did like the themes of worthiness, and especially a lot of the action, but it's probably about my 6th or 7th favorite thing to see Thor in. I do think it's an overall positive and fun to look back on, especially considering where the character ends up later on. In fact, it's kind of cute to look back on this character's humble beginnings with the way he learned to be worthy and just how different he is compared to what happens eventually. Remember when the MCU had a plan for every character they introduced? I remember. Ant-Man and the Wasp. Ant-Man and the Wasp is probably the third most overhated thing in the MCU. We'll get to the other two later, don't worry. I thought the villain in this movie was great, a real standout, and yes, that is because she ends up being good in the end. I've heard so many people say, oh, no one would sit through this movie if it didn't end up being relevant for Endgame, and I seriously don't get why. Sure, it's not the best thing ever, but I don't understand why so many people rank it as one of the worst things the MCU has ever made. It's a perfectly fine movie that is worse than the original Ant-Man, but at least it's better than its own sequel. You have to give it credit for that. Or maybe not. Moving on. Age of Ultron. I used to love Age of Ultron. I once considered it one of my favorite movies. That was when I was 14, and my opinion has greatly changed now. The more I watched it, the more holes appeared, and the less funny it was, and the more I grew to dislike the direction and dialogue. There's so many lame, tension-slaughtering jokes, and none of them are actually funny. It's easily the weakest of the Avengers movies, but I can't exactly call it awful. It's still super fun to see a lot of the interactions between characters, and it's still Vision's best role. There are a lot of excellent parts, just not a particularly well-built whole. It is disappointing that it's so close to being a good movie, but the direction just makes the whole thing feel flat and almost fake in a way. It feels like a parody of an Avengers movie, and if you're trying to take it seriously, that really doesn't work. Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was fantastic. Kind of. It had some parts that were some of the best things the shows had to offer, such as the casual relationship of Sam Wilson and his family, and a truly harrowing murder scene involving Walmart brand Captain America. I really used to like the villain, but she's grown worse and worse over time, to the point where I consider her kind of insulting, to be honest. She didn't really have much of a character, and it's a little silly that she falls victim to the kick-a-puppy syndrome. I did really like Sam's speech at the end of the show, and even if it didn't really go anywhere later on, I think it's enough to bump the show up to this spot on the list. B tiers. Here's where we get to the good movies, or at least relatively good. They have more good things than bad things overall, which means they're ultimately enjoyable products. These movies are a lot easier to talk about than the C tiers, which is a huge relief. The Incredible Hulk. This movie is dull and boring and too full of generic smash action to be good, is what I thought before I actually saw it. Dang, this movie's actually really underrated. Sure, it doesn't have Mark Ruffalo, but that's no problem. What it does have is a very relatable and tragic protagonist with a lot of good acting and character behind him, an interesting, intense story that actually had me invested, and some very grounded, good action. Well, outside of the fairly dismal finale, which is probably why so many people have bad movies of this very underrated movie, I'd actually recommend it. Also, yes, I am counting this as part of the MCU. It has Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, which is enough for me. Hawkeye. Hawkeye's really cute. That's kind of it, but I'll keep going. It's a charming tale about how Hawkeye finally gets to retire and be with his family, just like he's wanted to do for the last 7 years, which was nice to see. Kate Bishop is a fun protagonist and a good candidate for the Young Avengers, which I'm sure is coming along any year now. The villains are actually funny and entertaining most of the time, yet appropriately menacing when they need to be. The Christmas theming is a ton of fun, and it does add to the show in meaningful ways. I liked it a whole lot, even if it wasn't the most impactful or thought provoking thing ever. I'd also recommend this one. In fact, I recommend watching everything B tier and up. Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 is one of the most overhated things Marvel has ever made. Okay, sure, the Mandarin twist was weird and a little disappointing, but that doesn't mean the movie's bad, right? I mean, right, it actually doesn't. It's a meaningful story about recovering from trauma, learning to live with it, and ultimately moving on. It has a ton of good Tony Stark action that really shows off his ever-complexing character. It has a cool final battle that feels like the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. It has some genuinely very funny bits. The whole movie felt like the old Iron Man died and a new, more mature version took his place. All in all, good. She-Hulk. Here we go. The most overhated entry in the entire MCU. I swear, people are acting like She-Hulk burned their crops, poisoned their water supply, and delivered a plague into their houses. It's a fun show about everyday superhero shenanigans, people. It's not that bad. In fact, I actually enjoyed it. There's plenty to like. Juan, the frequent and actually appreciated cameos, Juan, the laid-back atmosphere, the very real and grounded antagonist, the return of Emil Blonsky as an actual character, that was a good surprise, and Wong. Yeah, he's the best part in what is actually a good show, everyone. You just don't get it. I swear, some of you are basically the villains in this show. WandaVision. WandaVision was amazing until it wasn't. This was a show that definitely got worse as it went on, with a genuinely fun and engaging premise devolving into more generic superhero stuff as it reached the ending. I enjoyed the sitcom stuff a whole lot, as I'm sure many people did, and really would have been content to watch more of that, just for a lot of episodes. It's fun to see domestic level stuff in the MCU, especially after such a cataclysmic finale the year before. If only we had gotten more episodes that were actually fun and entertaining, but we did have to end it with sword and all that nonsense. Whatever, it's still a good show, just not as good as it could have and should have been. I Am Groot. I Am Groot. It is cute. It doesn't get the boot. That's all I have to say. Oot. Ant-Man. Ant-Man is my favorite, somewhat forgettable MCU movie. Paul Rudd does a fantastic job as Scott Lang, and I'm glad that positive energy never goes away even as he does more and more movies, even in that one terrible movie I won't mention again. The entire angle this movie is approached from is fun and relatively unique, with it being a low-stakes heist movie in difference to most of the high-stakes superhero movies in the rest of the series. I'm kind of running out of things to say about Ant-Man, but it's good, I promise. I liked it. Also, yes, Luis is the best side character in the MCU, and the reason why Quantumania sucked is because he wasn't in it. Praise Luis. Iron Man. Oh, the original. The one that started the whole thing all the way back in 2008, Iron Man. I mean, if you don't count The Incredible Hulk as the first one, which I kind of did, but whatever. Iron Man is the first MCU movie in our hearts. The real question is, does it still hold up, even 16 entire years later? Holy fish paste, 16 years. Anyway, fortunately, yes, it does. The story about an egotistical jerk learning to care about other people is one of the MCU's most genuine, and the character of Tony Stark is engaging even at the beginning. I was able to watch it several times, and I found myself enjoying it each time. It's one of the most iconic movies in the MCU for a reason. It's Iron Man. It's fast-paced, it's funny, it's action-packed, it's well-written. It doesn't have a good villain, but it has a wonderful protagonist. This entire movie was a gamble, but it sure did pay off. Captain America Civil War. I will be honest here. Captain America Civil War is a film that's done well, written well, directed well, performed well, and a movie that I don't particularly enjoy. This might sound strange, but I'm just not a big fan of stories like this, except if they're incredibly amazing. Civil War is done well, like I said, but it's not done well enough to overcome that barrier. It is a good movie, though, I promise, featuring the best fight scene in the MCU up to that point, a lot of very effective drama, some stakes that feel more real and grounded than anything else in the series, and some very nearly heartbreaking moments. Civil War is a movie that you may or may not vibe with, but it's hard to deny it's good. If I was actually a fan of films like this, it would probably end up higher on my list. The Marvels. Yes, I think The Marvels is a good movie. It's a heck of a lot of fun. Sure, it has a rushed script and some of the scenes are weirdly edited and the villain has a weak presence, but there's just no denying how sugary fun this film is. Everything from the Flurkin Kittens to the Ocean Planet, where everything is a 24/7 Bollywood musical, to the frankly amazing fight scenes, is just very entertaining. They do some super cool things with the constant switching, even if it's messy early on. This is the cinematic equivalent of eating a candy bar. And dang it, I like candy bars! Doctor Strange. I might sound a little repetitive here, but Doctor Strange is a pretty good movie. Far better than its sequel, this movie is essentially a later version of Iron Man using then up-to-date MCU stylings. It's certainly one of the most visually creative movies in the entire series, even to this day, and the rest of it isn't bad either. It doesn't have very good villains, but it doesn't exactly need to. Stephen Strange is good enough of a protagonist to the point where having complex and layered villains isn't actually needed. Of course, it would have made the movie better, but don't get me wrong, it's still a pretty great movie. Spider-Man Homecoming. Hey, hey, Uncle Ben doesn't die in Spider-Man Homecoming. In fact, he's not even in this movie. In fact, it isn't a played-out origin film we've seen twice before. In fact, this is one of the better Spider-Man movies, or at least it's above average. Seriously, Spider-Man has some good movies, and this is of course one of them. I loved a lot of things about this. Ned, the way Peter has to constantly balance his school and superhero life, the actually well-balanced blend of humor and drama, the car ride scene. It all comes together into one of the MCU's funnest packages. Black Panther. Now here we have Black Panther. It's a pretty good movie. I liked T'Challa, I liked M'Baku, who's probably my favorite character in the entire movie, and I liked Killmonger, who's one of the best villains in the MCU. The character arc that T'Challa goes through is very well done, and the artistic stylings of the film elevate an already pretty good story to something even higher. Sure, it's got your standard Marvel problems of tone, and to a lesser degree pacing, but that doesn't stop Black Panther from landing in the upper echelons of B tier. I think it's a pretty easy movie to both like and respect. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I'm gonna say it, Shang-Chi has the best fight choreography in the entire MCU. That shouldn't come as a surprise since it's a martial arts movie, but I think it bears to be said. That, however, is not the only good thing about this movie. The villain's ties to the hero are solid, the twisting and turning plot is interesting, and the visuals are great for the most part. It's not quite a 10 Reigns out of 10 Reigns, but still real neat. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This should have been A tier. It should have. It has one of the strongest character-involved plots in the MCU, one of the best emotional through lines, and a ton of Guardian fun that keeps the movie ticking along just nicely the entire time, but I'm sorry, I can't get past some of the humor in this one. It's too crass for me to enjoy and actively takes me out of the film. If I had just a little less of that, it would be A tier, but top of B tier it is. Seriously, I cannot stress how much I want this movie to be higher, but it just isn't. I would rate this movie an A, or maybe even S tier if it wasn't for the crassness of a good bit of the humor. A tiers. Ms. Marvel. Ms. Marvel is my second favorite of the MCU TV shows, featuring a fun, sparky protagonist that injects pure life into the show, a wonderful setting that actually manages to make the MCU refreshing, and really fun editing that fills the show with punk energy. It does kind of slip over itself during the climax in the attempt of balancing two villains while only developing one, but it did still do enough cool stuff to warrant a spot in A tier. It might be the weakest spot in A tier, but it still firmly belongs there. Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. Man, I love all these crazy idiots so much. This is just a really fun time that perfectly fits in with the rest of the Guardians movie, featuring everyone you know and love. Drax in particular is the standout in this, and the entire storyline is the kind of craziness that only the Guardians can bring to the table. I cannot believe the plot of a real MCU project involves kidnapping Kevin Bacon while he's watching Santa Claus Conquers the Martians in order to give him as a Christmas present. Give some of the other classics a break. This is the perfect Christmas movie to watch every year. Thor: Love and Thunder. Alright, hear me out. I know you all are probably going to hate me for this, but I really, really enjoyed Love and Thunder. Before you're all up in arms, let me speak. I thought Gore was a fantastic antagonist that managed to be both viciously intimidating and brutally sympathetic. I thought the struggle of Jane with cancer was sad and well done. I thought the humor actually worked for the most part. I thought the themes of the meaning of love were impactful. I love the inclusion of omnipotent city and myth-accurate Zeus. I absolutely loved everything that happened after that, including the incredibly powerful climax and one of my favorite scenes in the entire MCU, Call the Axe. I thought it was great. Fight me, you can think what you want. Far From Home. Far From Home is my favorite movie that revolves around an arthropod based superhero battling elemental monsters in Europe. Sure, it's the only movie I can think of that fits that description, but it's still a good movie. It serves as a wonderful follow up to what was established in Endgame, everything from the influence of the blip to the influence of Tony's death, both in the world and especially on Peter himself. The twist relating to the villain is the best part of the film, and everything else is pretty great too. The humor, along with the rest of Spider Man films, is great, and it manages to wrap up Phase 3 in a nice, pleasing way. Thor Ragnarok. Ragnarok is a blast, but you knew that already. Ragnarok is packed full of fun moments, fun dialogue, fun action, fun characters, Ragnarok is nearly all fun and nothing else. It's impossible to take this movie even remotely seriously, but honestly, that works. It works for a film to be just pure goofy entertainment, especially because this one could have been so dark, and I'm glad it wasn't. I'm glad we got the silly, Thor Ragnarok that we did. But hey, it has enough plot and drama to somewhat even it out. Like eating a side of chicken alongside an entire cake. It works, and it works well. The Avengers. The Avengers. The classic. The one that really kick-started the MCU from an interesting experiment to something massive. And it honestly still holds up. Not only that, but it's still really good all these years later. There's just something about this film that works. Whether it's the gradual, slow burn of a plot, the great villain in the form of Loki, the wonderful interactions between the characters, or something else, it all just clicks in a highly satisfying way. I still rewatch this movie now and again, and each time I enjoy it. It might not be the most emotionally complex, or even the best written in the MCU, but it screams iconic in a way that almost no other movie does, and I'm pretty sure you all know exactly which movies those are. Don't worry, we'll get to them soon. Wakanda Forever. Wakanda Forever, in a way, is the anti-Phase 4, and I think that's a really good thing. After a tonal, conceptual mess of a phase filmed with random side stories, debatable quality, and vague gesturing in the general direction of the multiverse that ultimately went nowhere as of the time of this video, it was absolutely refreshing to have a far more grounded, introspective, and dare I say it, mature entry in the MCU. There are a lot of scenes that are just serious conversation, which I actually like, and the more adult tone really does this one wonders. I can't get into what I really like about it without going into spoilers, which is against the point of this video, but I can say that if you haven't already seen it, I'd highly recommend checking it out. Avengers Endgame. I'll get one thing straight first. Avengers Endgame had the single best individual scene in not only any Marvel movie, but any scene in any movie I've seen, period. The scene was a landmark of cinema that will continue to be iconic for decades to come, and it was absolutely worth the 11 years of build-up that it took for all of us to get there. That being said, the rest of the movie was great too. Act 1 was dark and thoughtful, which was a massive tone shift after Infinity War in the best possible way. Act 2, I'm gonna be real, I do think the pacing fumbled during this act, but it was still very nice to see with a lot of things that warmed my and many people's hearts. Act 3, of course, was nothing less than absolutely blow your face off spectacular, and Act 4 was a soulful closeout to the Infinity Saga that many people had grown up alongside. It's a wonderful film, and deserves the top of A tier. S tiers. Guardians of the Galaxy. The found family. The menacing villain, the witty banter, the emotional payoffs abounding, the major overall plot relevance, the talking tree, the action, the suspense, the drama. Guardians of the Galaxy really does have it all. It is genuinely one of my favorite movies I've ever seen, with tight writing, impactful themes, some of the best characters in Marvel, and of course such a vibrant, unique musical aesthetic that adds a whole new layer of brilliance to what is already a phenomenal film. If you haven't seen it, what are you even doing? It's the Guardians of the Galaxy. You already know it's great, but here I am telling you anyway, because it's just that good. Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man No Way Home finally let Peter find his footing, and I couldn't be happier. In this absolute triumph of a movie, which I cannot say a lot about without giving away major spoilers, Peter Parker truly comes into his own as a hero, no longer merely little Iron Man. with some of the best drama in the MCU, some of the best villains, some of the best humor, some of the best fight scenes, some of the best direction, and certainly some of the best writing, No Way Home elevates it far beyond anything else in its phase, and below just 2 films in the MCU. And if you've been keeping up so far, you already know just what those films are. Loki Season 2. You know, once I finished this one, I realized something. I would be perfectly happy letting Loki Season 2 serve as the ultimate series finale, the climatic swan song to the entire MCU. Not only does it give us a complete, satisfying character arc for one of the series' most iconic and first villains, not only is it an amazingly written, deep, philosophical thrill ride, not only does it give us a better rap on Kane in the multiverse than whatever we're actually gonna get, not only does Mobius get to ride a jet ski, not only is it so wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey that I'm probably going to watch it again just to get what happened, but this gives us the perfect ending for one of my new favorite MCU characters, Loki. This isn't just one of my favorite MCU entries and favorite MCU show by a long shot, but one of my favorite shows in general. I'm putting it in 3rd place as a baseline, but will probably rise in position over time. Seriously, if you've seen the first season, there is no comparison. Loki Season 2 serves to me as the ultimate capstone of Marvel Studios, sending it off in the perfect way. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I almost don't even know what to say. Where did Guardians 3 even come from? After years and years of almost straight mediocrity and midness, here comes the most emotional, most heart-wrenching, most deeply personal thing the MCU has ever done. This movie has the best the Guardians have ever been. One of the best villains, one of the most character-driven stories, everything. I can hardly go into what makes it so beautifully effective without going into major spoilers. But let me say, I am not a crier, but any movie that makes me misty-eyed by having a shot of a cyborg otter slowly walking towards the camera absolutely knows everything it is doing. And yet, it isn't number 1. Avengers Infinity War. This is it, Chief. Infinity War is the peak of the MCU, and one of the greatest superhero movies ever made. Remember what I said about No Way Home? Infinity War delivers that better and more. The best drama, the best action, the best villain, the most dire stakes, and the single most crushing end of any blockbuster. Yeah, I said it. I don't know how the Russo brothers managed to successfully wrangle a story containing 3 simultaneous POVs and well over a dozen protagonists, but hot dang, they did it. They turned Thanos into a simultaneously menacing and sympathetic person. They smushed so many characters together and somehow gave the appropriate amount of time to all of them. It's heartbreaking, it's majestic, it's spectacular, it's Infinity War, and I don't doubt myself at all putting it as number 1. And that's the list. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you'd like me to make more content like this, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment of some sort. It really does warm my heart to read through what everyone thinks of my silly little videos I make. See you all next time!